Well, folks, any of you know this young fellow, Andre Haughton? Comrade Andre Haughton? Anybody know him? Anybody on friendly terms with him? Yes? Call him for me, please. Tell him to come to Auntie Michelle. She want to have a nice word with him. Now go kill him, Now kill him at all. Because Auntie Michelle has a very soft heart for a young fellow, and him look young. Yes, look like him scarcely out of his nappies. Well, actually, him don't look like him come from the nappy era. Yes, him scarcely out of his pampers. So he's young and therefore impressionable, and we ought not to kill them when them open their mouth and say certain things, even if it's Nancy's story, even if it is propaganda. And if it's propaganda, I suppose we can work with that. If it is a spin, we can work with that too. If it is a damn lie, that kind of really, really testing faith. But them young and they will learn. Yes, so call Mas Andre and tell him, don't be afraid. Auntie Michelle is not going to bite him. So if you know him, call him and please kindly send this video to him so he can sit down and watch it. Yes. I am going to play a video that he uploaded to his page. It appears as though it says real, so it may have been Facebook. Not quite sure what that is. I think it's Facebook. And he was giving his version, and I say so without fear of being contradicted, that what he told the gathering of comrades is his version of the meltdown in the 1990s. Yes, he evidently read a set of circumstances which occurred at the time, and from that drew his own conclusion as to who is to be blamed. And he seems to be, well, I would say he seems to be here and there, kind of half and half as to who it is to be blamed. 1 minute, it is the IMF's fault. The next minute, it is the Jamaica Labour Party fault. I will let you hear that video, and then I'm going to ask young Andre a question or two. And I think you would want to hear those questions, and I am sure you'd love to hear the answers. But before we go there, let me welcome you all to Jamaica 411. I want to thank you all for joining me today. My name is Michelle Stern, and I am your host. I want to say special shout out to my subscribers. Welcome back. Always lovely to have you, and especially reading your comments. Yes, man, me love read the comments. And some of you make me laugh, you see, man. Me no make no comment, so when you thump up PNP, me no make too much comment about it, but me I dead with laugh. And sometimes I agree with you, but not really. But when a truth, right? Can't help truth. Yes. So I love to read your comments. So please, guys, keep those comments going. Now, if you are here with me for the first time, welcome. I hope that after watching this video, you and Mas Horton, you would have found the truth that you came seeking. Also, if you have not yet done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel, because what old-time people say, right? Yes, encouragement sweetens labor. And I also want to ask everyone a big favor. Please share this video. And for your kindness, I thank you all in advance. Well, now that you're back with me, let's get down to business. Well, I am a little bit surprised at Andre Horton, and in some ways, I'm not so surprised, because human beings have a failing, and sometimes we start out good as good people, and then we start to associate ourselves with other people. And some of us, when we have strong leadership qualities, we can actually influence those other people to be like us or to want to be like us. And other times, when we don't have very strong leadership qualities or abilities, or we don't have much confidence in ourselves, we tend to be swayed by the companies that we keep. And I think that in Andre Haughton's case, a very young, idealist young man, not quite sure why he went into politics. And Andre, please tell us the reason why you went into politics. I'd love to hear. True, true. I'd love to hear why you went into politics, what it is that you think that you can do, what it is you want to do, want to accomplish, what is your vision for Jamaica, and how you see yourself in it. I want to hear that, and I'm sure my listeners would like to hear that as well, and my subscribers, labor right or no. Yes, because I'm sure they too don't have a problem with a handsome young fellow like you. Even though you're a comrade, they may have a problem with that, but not with you as a man. So please come and tell us what that is all about. So what is happening to young Haughton? Young Horton was invited into the PNP by Dr. Peter Phillips. And while he was in the Senate, he clearly did not understand his role as somebody who is in the Senate, not as an independent person, but as a member of a political party. And that would imply that much as he is bright in economics, he clearly doesn't understand the politics, which would suggest that he don't understand or know the Constitution and what it requires. He doesn't understand the model of political system called the Westminster model. And I think we should blame the PNP for that, for taking people and putting them in our Senate, seeking to get themselves elected, and they don't know nothing about the system. And to the extent that that is happening in the Labour Party, Mas Andrew, that is something that you guys need to correct. And it's never too late for a shower of rain. Yes. So I think that we all would benefit greatly if we have people who understand the system that we operate and the Constitution. That way when they go out and talk, and them talk with them not to be lawyer, them just understand, and they don't understand, they ask the lawyer, or the lawyer explain it to them, and they can go out there now and tell the people what is what. A society cannot thrive and get anywhere on lies. Not black people society, for sure. The white people and the Chinese people and the Indian, them being abominations, them can do anything except talk the truth. Because once the truth them start to talk, them start feeling a problem. We and them is not the same. And so, young Horton, I can see what happened to you. Whatever reason it is why you decide to choose politics. And whatever it is that you understand your role to be in the great scheme of things, it is clear to me that you are not a man of very strong conviction. At least over time, even if you were, because you're young and impressionable, you seem to have been, how should I put it, worn down. And now, keeping bad company, you start to behave like the company you keep. That Englishman sitting beside you, who is sitting in our parliament illegally and is being allowed to get away with it by the little weak-kneed people that we have in the parliament. He is not an example that any young fellow should want to follow. Let alone a black man. Is so disaster going befall you, right? But you need to survive, and perhaps you may believe that in order to succeed, you're going to have to be a different man. whatever it is, I am not the one to give you advice. You go down the road of destruction on your own, because I am sure your mother grew you good. I am sure your mother grew you good and taught you how to be an upstanding young man, because that is how you came into politics. So if you want now, because of your desire, or maybe it's your ego to get power, to sell yourself short and become like the crowd that is about you, that is your decision. You are sufficiently bright to know right from wrong, and you're too young to see further than the length of your nose. And therefore, I will say to you that the path you're on is on the path of destruction. Step back, and go back to what you were doing before. Step back. Now, you were at somewhere, I don't know where. I see Patricia name at the back, so I don't know if it was something was taking place in the seat that she hopes to win. That's East St. Andrew, where Favour Williams is the MP. And you delivered of yourself a commentary on what you say occurred in the 1990s that caused the financial meltdown and who is to be blamed. And I am going to play for my viewers, and I'm going to play to remind you of what you said. Maybe you never listen to it again. So I'm going to play it, and I want you to listen to yourself. And then I have a couple questions for you, and then you can reflect. And I hope that you do not repeat the mistake again, because next time I may not be quite so kind and generous as I feel now. I don't think you're going to like the next words that will come out of my mouth. No, I don't think so.
It is. 1988, Gilbert came. And prior to Gilbert coming, because they tried to hold on to the value of the dollar so much, our reserves, which is what we use to purchase foreign goods, the US reserves that we have went into negative. So Jamaica found itself in a negative position, cannot access money to participate in foreign currency transactions. And it was very bad. The IMF came in and they said that, listen, this government needs shaking up. And the JLP government ignored them. Then, to make things worse, Hurricane Gilbert came in 1988 and ravaged the country. In order to rebuild, to get the equipment that we need, to get the cheap energy that we need to rebuild, we had to leverage the IMF once more. At that time, Michael Manley came into power again, and he came in and inherited a country that was destroyed throughout the 80s by the Jamaica Labour Party. The IMF, having recognized that Jamaica needs this foreign currency desperately, imposed on us what we call the Washington Consensus. So you can go and research the Washington Consensus. It was a 10-point plan aimed at moving Jamaica out of a negative reserve position to put in Jamaica on a positive developmental growth path. Now, contained in the Washington Consensus was a clause to liberalize the foreign exchange market. And when I went to the fund, IMF, in 2017, I spoke to a couple of their lawyers at the time, and they themselves admitted fault to pressure in Jamaica to institute the Washington Consensus without the necessary controls. What ensued? Because they forced us to, instead of taking our time to liberalize the foreign exchange market so the exchange rate can move from, at the time it was 4-1, to 5-1, to 6-1. The currency moved from 6-1 in 1990 to 25-1 in 1992, by the time Manley settled into power. Which means that if you owe somebody $6 today, and tomorrow you owe them $24. 6 4s, 24. It means that the exchange rate moving from $6 to 1 to $25 to 1 saw every person's debt in foreign currency increase fourfold. So the major banks who borrowed in foreign currency, Eagle Bank, Central National Bank, Citizens Bank, these banks that borrowed heavily in foreign currency, found themselves, instead of having a debt of $6, now has a debt of $25, 4 times more. And that means the entire banking system was going to crash. The entire banking system, because of the debt imposed on us by the IMF, was about to crash. And what had to happen? The People's National Party had to take decisive action. And it was at that time when we decided that we need a commission to help the financial sector adjust to what happened due to the Washington Consensus. And that is when FinSAC was established. So FinSAC was established as the Financial Sector Adjustment Company to adjust the financial sector to the fact that the IMF imposed the Washington Consensus and push up the debt of our major banks. And in an economy, if your banks fail, all the economy fails. So we had to take decisive action. That decisive action meant that that financial sector adjustment company had to help the banks remodel and liquidate. And that is how Jamaica was able to cope with the atrocities of what the Jamaica Labour Party did to us throughout the 1980s. So when you hear them speak about FinSAC and they want the FinSAC report, the FinSAC report is no indictment on us. It is an indictment on the Jamaica Labour Party who pushed the country in the position that we found ourselves in by the early 1990s. That's why they won't publish it. And that is why they won't publish it. Because they know that they only can put a mirage in front of your face. That it is the People's National Party who, yes, instituted FinSAC, but why? The why has to come before what exactly was done. And that is why we cannot get the FinSAC report.
I could not help but notice how the comrades were silently listening to you. Very politely, I'm sure, for we are polite people. And when they were to give a little clap, when you make a little statement that sounds like something that they should clap about, they give you a little sprinkling of claps. That is because them all know that what you're talking is hogwash. That is not the history that we recall, right? And I would like to ask you a serious question, young fellow. PJ never knows that the labor rights fault. First of all, though, come to think of it, you can't seem to make up your mind as to whose fault it is. First, you say it was the IMF that forced the government into the action that they took. And you said that they are to be blamed for forcing the government to liberalize the foreign exchange, right? Without reserve. Now, I'm a little curious about that because the Washington Consensus is not only about the liberalization of the foreign exchange, it's about other things too. So let us take a quick look at one or two of them. So what is this Washington Consensus? It says the Washington Consensus refers to a set of economic policy recommendations. So it is a set of economic policy recommendations, but by who? Largely promoted by the International Monetary Fund, that's the IMF, the World Bank, and the US Treasury. And both the IMF, the World Bank, and of course, they are dominated by the United States. So they are a group of organizations that try to help our countries that have balance of payment problem, meaning they can't pay for them exports. So the IMF will come and assess them, tell them what they need to do to fix the problems so that they can pay back the money. That's the work of the IMF. To say to the World Bank, yeah man, you can give Jamaica the money, because when we go look, them look to me like they can pay back the money that you're going to lend them, right? And so we get the money now to pay for our imports. And that's largely because we have a foreign exchange problem. Meaning to say, we're not earning enough foreign exchange to pay for our imports. You follow? So they now sat down, the three groups, to determine what they believe are the economic policy recommendations that countries should follow so that they can do much better. And you heard Haughton say that the objective that they had was that these economies would be able to develop over time and grow. So their intentions were noble, right? It says that they emphasized free market principles and reduced state intervention for developing countries, particularly in the 1980s and 1990s. In other words, they want all of the countries that come to them for help to turn into a capitalist country. And in those circumstances, they would now have access, their manufacturers will now have access to send goods and products into these countries to compete with the local manufacturers, most of whom never had the tools or the capital to compete. And then we end up in a worse condition, right? But that was their objective, and them claims say it would help us to grow and develop. Now, that is what the Washington Consensus is. Remember now, it's the IMF, the World Bank, and the US Treasury, and they are of the view that if developing countries want to do well, they need to practice free market principles. Now, what are those exactly? So, Young Horton told you that there were 10 points to this Washington Consensus, what they all agree on, those three entities. It says, the Washington Consensus advocated for fiscal discipline. Now, remember Horton said that the reason why we had a collapse of the banking sector was because the IMF forced us to liberalize our foreign exchange. Here are the 10 points. They forced us into that. Were they not trying to force us into fiscal discipline? And how it is we fail to exercise fiscal discipline, but we just allow them to force us into liberalizing the foreign exchange when we had no reserves? Explain that. Then there is a redirection of public spending that they recommend. So you may argue that infrastructure development may have been one such thing. All right, we'll leave that. Tax reform, there was the introduction of the GCT in 1991. The financial liberalization. Now, what is that? According to this group called SADC, liberalization of the financial sector involves removing restrictions and regulatory controls over financial institutions, thereby allowing key instruments such as interest rates and credit distribution to be determined by the market. And that was introduced. But of course, the Bank of Jamaica was busy trying to manipulate the interest rate in order to prevent the overheating of the economy, which was what was happening. That was what was happening. I never mentioned that. So these are the 10 things the Washington Consensus were advocating. Each of the countries that were coming to them asking for help, this is what they should practice in order to grow their economy. And the first thing them have on them list is fiscal discipline. And I don't think that anybody want to accuse Mas PJ and Mas Omar Davies of being fiscally disciplined. Not at all. I don't think so. So I don't think that it is fair for you to say that Omar and PJ was forced into anything. As a matter of fact, the history that we know of came from the submission that R. Danny Williams made to the FinSA Commission. And he said that he and a group of other private sector interests went and met with PJ. And in the course of that meeting, they were the ones who encouraged him to liberalize. And they were the ones who encouraged him to liberalize quickly and not do it in phases. He said so in his submission. Did you read that, Young Haughton? You should. R. Danny Williams' submission. Matter of fact, we did a video on it. We read it right through. And therefore, it was PJ who made the decision. And he made a poor decision. And me, I blame him for not having a good representation of the private sector around him because he clearly did not have the manufacturers there. Because if one manufacturer was present, they would have said, Prime Minister, you cannot liberalize and you cannot do it quickly because many of us would go under. We need time to retool so that we can compete with the goods coming in. And then he may say, okay, how much time you need? And he may say, 17 months to retool. And he may say, all right. And then bring it in phases that will not affect the manufacturers. And by the end of the 17 months, when everybody is good and ready, because he's supposed to announce and tell everybody what he's going to do, so that then can be good and ready. And therefore, when the economy is open, them can compete with them foreign people, and nobody probably would have to leave the country. But that never happened because PJ did not have the people around him that was representing the interests of the private sector. He had bankers and insurance companies, and they were the ones who were hoping to profit from the opening up of the economy, because if the local manufacturers even fail, people going to import and take up the gap, then we still make money. So they make money whether or not we're importing or we're exporting. Simple as that. And so they were the ones who persuaded PJ perhaps that they should go with the Washington Consensus. Now, you spoke about the devaluation that was the result of the banks going under. Now, I don't know of anybody who had that theory. You are the only man we hear with that story. Of all the discussions we hear from Omar and PJ, we never hear any of them claim that that was the reason that they went under. Omar says it was bad management in the banks and the financial institutions. PJ just was quiet about it. But you are a very bright fellow, and we're very happy for the opportunity to ask you a couple of questions. I hope you can answer and help us out who don't know. I am going to read from this article very briefly. The Jamaican economy, which history has been characterized as a story of, I don't know what else it says, but it's coming from the Ministry of Finance, and it says 16th of October 2024, so it's recent. So they're talking about the condition of the economy in 1989. The Jamaican economy achieved positive growth due to buoyant construction, mining, manufacturing, and tourism, partially influenced by the rebuilding efforts consequent on the passage of Hurricane Gilbert in 1988. They said unemployment was reduced to approximately 15%. Gross fixed investment was positive at 26%. And there was a fiscal surplus of 2.2% of GDP. Sound good so far, don't it? Yes. However, they said, nevertheless, the current account deficit exceeded 7% of GDP. That not sound good. Net international reserves were negative. That is what you were talking about. We never had no reserve. Plus, debt exceeded 100% of gross domestic product. I don't know where the PJ get this 200% from. This is the Ministry of Finance reporting. It went on to say, and debt service accounted for 43% of public expenditures. That never sound good either. And then they talk about the imbalances were sheltered by unsustainable external aid and credit, with official capital inflows bordering on 10% of gross domestic product. But here is what I want you to help us with, young Haughton. It says here, and please help us, because I know you know the answer. This was further compounded by considerable increases in money supply, which increased by 97% in 1991. Who was the government in 1991? And do you recall who was the Minister of Finance? You were probably a little boy if you did born then. That would have been P.J. Patterson. I don't know. Manley must have been well sick at that time if you're going to name a lawyer as Minister of Finance. But that's what he did. And PJ increased the money supply by 97%. That is what we hear now. At that time, we heard it was 120%. Now, being a bright fellow and you went to good school, can you explain to us what effect increasing the money supply in 1 year by 97%, what effect would that have on the economy? That's the first thing. Particularly the foreign exchange. Would that have any effect at all on the value of the foreign exchange? This very idea within a country that at that time, I do believe we were importing about 60% of our inputs were coming from import, and the money supply in Jamaican stock increased by 97% in 1 year. What effect would that have on the foreign exchange? That's the first thing. Second thing is that when this shocking news got around that our money supply had increased by 97%, right? That was after the money started to devalue. Remember, you said it started at $6. It was actually $6.52. Let me show you the chart. So here we go. So this is January of 1990, and the foreign exchange for that month ended at $6.57. I think that's what you mean. And during 1992, it went as high as $24.67 in April. So the average at the end of the year was, I do believe, $22 and something. But we understood the point that you were trying to make. Now, you had said to the comrades these words, that what ensued, because they forced us to, instead of taking our time to liberalize the foreign exchange market so that the exchange rate can move from, at the time it was 4-to-1 to 5-to-1 to 6-to-1. The currency moved from 6-to-1 in 1990 to 25-to-1 in 1992 by the time Manley settled into power. Now here's the problem. The foreign exchange was not liberalized until September of 1991. So that devaluation you were referring to, which took place in 1990, had nothing whatsoever to do with the liberalization, right? That had to do with something else. And what else could it be? Prior to the liberalization of the foreign exchange in 1991, the money moved from $5.77 in 1989 to $12.22 in 1991. That is a 113% devaluation of the currency. Now, we're going to peep in 1991 to see when the money started to devalue badly. So here is a picture of the monthly increase in 1991. It started at $8.18 in January and ends at $20.54. Now, the currency was steadily moving from January to June. It moved from $8.18 to $10.37. That would be about 12% increase. And then between June and August or September, it moved about 30-odd%. And from then, between September and December, when the foreign exchange was now liberalized, it moved another $7, which would be almost 50%. And then I suppose it started to march. Now, I bring this up to you, Andre, for you to tell us whether or not it was the foreign exchange liberalization which caused this initial march in the foreign exchange, or was it, according to the Ministry of Finance, this was further compounded by considerable increases in money supply, which increased by 97% in 1991. These imbalances were helping to fuel inflation, which continued its growth trend, reaching over 80% by 1991. Now, would you agree, and I want you to tell me if you would agree, that when the money supply had increased and the inflation started in the economy, that would have started the matter of speculating on the currency, the US dollar, right? These would have been persons who would have been in business, some of them from the 1970s and 80s, and understand what happens when the money starts to devalue. And when they heard that the money supply was increased by 97%, some of them bright like you too, so they understood that the value of the Jamaican dollar that they hold is going to depreciate. And so that was when it would have started for some, the speculation on the currency, which further drove down the value of the currency. So by the time the liberalization came around, it only compounded the problem. Would you agree? Because there was no liberalization. The Washington Consensus forcing PJ to liberalize in 1991, which occurred September 25, had nothing whatsoever to do with the devaluation that was taking place before. What it had to do with, obviously, was the increase in the money supply. Do you agree or you disagree? And so, therefore, your reasoning about the matter of the past, which you may not have lived through but you read through, wouldn't you agree that it is a little faulty? And that Seaga, of course, left us with no reserves. And Seaga, had he been alive, would beg your pardon and remind you that the Bauxite Company had left Jamaica and a whole heap of problems. And even him that they were touting as a genius in finance couldn't solve it. There were no reserves, but the PNP was aware that there was no reserve, right? And yet they went and they liberalized nonetheless, even after increasing the money supply by 97%. So you cannot put the blame solely at the feet of those who started it. The PJ and they had economists to advise him, and him had sense. But maybe he never understood what would happen because he's, after all, a lawyer. And sadly, he listened to the wrong set of people who came to advise him. So when you're going to talk about the IMF is to be blamed, and the Labour Party of the 1980s, they are to be blamed, why it is you think that PJ should not be blamed? Him was a Minister of Finance. So he must be exonerated. What would be the reason for increasing the money supply? How does that help us? How did that help us with the foreign exchange reserve problem that we had? Talk to me and tell me. So you see, Andre, you were talking about some theory you must have read and came to your own conclusion that that could have contributed to what went on in the 1990s. But to absolve PJ, when PJ was the Minister of Finance, who would have increased the money supply by 97% and compounded an already bad problem with an overheated economy to boot, right, that Omar Davis was brought in to try and fix, and there was only one mechanism available to them at that time, and that was to use the interest rate. And of course, our people being dumb or maybe too smart for their own good, even when the interest rate reached 60%, they were still borrowing. In a society where you have sensible people, the minute you increase the interest rate by 0.25%, them stop buying, them stop borrowing. So no matter how the government increase it, we go and still borrow because we very different, We look at it from a monthly basis. We start to break it down. Well, 60% means that I'll be borrowing at 5% per month. I can manage that. And then they couldn't. I was reminded by a comrade who said he did that, and I forgot entirely that that was the kind of arguments that people were using at the time, why they continue to borrow. And so they have to be blamed for their own demise. But at the same time, to talk about let me see the language that you use again, the atrocities that was committed by the Labour Party. I mean, I'm not a Labour Party supporter, but no, man, you know, to tell lie on people. What atrocities them committed? They've used up the foreign exchange reserve, trying to protect the dollar. So am I supposed to conclude, or we should conclude, from your line of argument, that what he ought to have done, this is Eddie, is allow the foreign exchange to devalue and maintain the reserve? You may have a point. But then the problem of the runaway dollar would have started from much earlier. Because the long and short of it was that we had all these encouragement acts, which gave tax incentive for these businesses to come in. And the government did not ensure that they were retooling. Every 10 years when the tax holiday expired or was about to expire, then come say, no, 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 you can't leave it. You can't afford to open the economy to competition because then we would fail and many people would lose their job. And in the meantime, they were there not retooling. So we, the people in Jamaica, were subsidizing the inefficiency. And what PJ did when he opened the economy was to flush out the whole damn lot of them. But he should have at least give them an opportunity to retool. And if they fail to retool within the time that he gave them, then them crash. Nobody can blame him for that. But that is how it is. So rethink your supposition as to what went down at a time when you probably were too young to know and you had to read it in books. Because I don't know which book you read that, as a matter of fact. Would you be so kind as to give us the source? Because as an educated man, having gone and earned a doctorate, they would have trained you that whenever it is that you are coming to posit some opinion or views, you should tell the people what the source of that information is. So come and tell us what is the source of the information that said that it was the rapid increase in the debt that these banks borrowed abroad, according to you, that caused them to collapse. And then there's another question. I want to know why it is that the Bank of Nova Scotia, CIBC, and Citibank survived. Why it is that Jamaica National and some others survive, and the credit unions, I do believe, survive. You need to tell us that. And then we will look into it and see if maybe you might be onto something that others weren't onto. What do you say to that? Sound good? Yes. Anyway, folks, that's it for me today. Thank you so much for joining me, for sharing, liking, and subscribing, and leaving your comments in the comments section. So until next time, take very good care of yourselves and walk good.